It was a chilly December morning in Boston, and the streets were alive with the usual hustle and bustle. People hurried along, bundled up in coats, scarves, and gloves, trying to escape the biting wind. Among them was Karoline Leavitt, a young journalist with a passion for storytelling. Karoline loved her job because it gave her the chance to meet people from all walks of life and share their stories with the world. Every day felt like an adventure, but this particular morning would change her life in ways she never expected. As Karoline walked toward her office, weaving through the crowd, something unusual caught her attention. On the corner of the street near a busy intersection, there was a man sitting on the ground. He was wrapped in a dirty, tattered blanket, his face hidden behind a thick beard. A cardboard sign rested beside him, scribbled with the words, "Anything helps." At first glance, he looked like many others who called the city streets home, another face lost in the chaos of urban life. But as Karoline passed by, their eyes met for just a moment, and her heart skipped a beat. There was something eerily familiar about him. She stopped in her tracks, turning back to get a better look. The man glanced up again, his weary eyes locking onto hers. That's when it hit her. He wasn't just any stranger. This was someone she knew, someone she had once admired deeply. Her mind raced as fragments of memories came flooding back. It was her high school English teacher, the same man who had inspired her to pursue writing and journalism. His name was Mr. Thompson. Karoline stood frozen, staring at him in disbelief. How could this be? The last time she'd seen him, he was standing confidently in front of a classroom, passionately discussing literature and encouraging students to find their voices. He used to say, "Words have power. Use them wisely." Those words had stuck with her throughout her career, guiding her every step of the way. Now, here he was, sitting on a cold sidewalk, looking broken and defeated. She wanted to turn away, to pretend she hadn't recognized him, but she couldn't. Something inside her wouldn't let her walk past without saying anything. Taking a deep breath, she approached him cautiously. "Excuse me," she said softly, kneeling down so she was at eye level with him. "Do I know you?" The man looked up, confusion flickering across his face. Then, slowly, his expression changed. Recognition dawned in his tired eyes. "Karoline?" he murmured, his voice raspy and weak. "Yes, it's me," she replied, her voice trembling slightly. "Mr. Thompson, is that really you?" He nodded faintly, managing a small, sad smile. "It's been a long time," he said, his tone heavy with regret. Karoline's chest tightened as she took in his appearance. Gone was the sharp-dressed, energetic teacher she remembered. In his place was a frail man with hollow cheeks, unkempt, hair and clothes that barely shielded him from the freezing weather. It was hard to reconcile the two images, the vibrant mentor from her past, and the fragile figure before her now. Unable to contain her curiosity and concern, Karoline asked, "What happened? How did you end up here?" Mr. Thompson hesitated, as if unsure where to begin. Finally, he sighed and started talking. His story unfolded piece by piece, revealing a series of devastating events that had spiraled out of control. Bad investments, mounting medical bills, and a string of misfortunes had left him financially ruined. Eventually, he lost his home, his savings, and even his will to keep fighting. Each word he spoke felt like a punch to Karoline's gut. Here was a man who had dedicated his life to helping others, only to be abandoned by the very system he had contributed to. As they talked, Karoline noticed the emptiness in his eyes, a stark contrast to the spark of enthusiasm she remembered from her school days. It broke her heart to see him like this, reduced to begging for scraps on a cold winter morning. Yet, despite everything, there was still a glimmer of the person he used to be. When he spoke about teaching, his voice softened, and for a brief moment, she saw a trace of the passion that had once defined him. Before leaving, Karoline promised herself that she wouldn't forget this encounter. She couldn't. There was something about seeing her former teacher in such dire straits that stirred something deep within her. As she walked away, heading toward her office, her mind buzzed with questions. Why had no one helped him sooner? What could she do to make a difference? Little did she know this chance meeting would set off a chain of events that would change both their lives forever. Karoline couldn't focus on her work that day. Her mind kept drifting back to the man she had seen on the street, her former teacher, reduced to living in unimaginable conditions. Every time she tried to type up an article or answer emails, fragments of their conversation replayed in her head. How could this happen? She wondered over and over again. It didn't make sense. How could someone who had poured so much of himself into teaching, into shaping young minds, end up discarded like this? By mid-afternoon, Karoline realized she couldn't just sit at her desk pretending everything was fine. She needed answers, not just for herself, but for Mr. Thompson too. After finishing her most urgent tasks, she grabbed her coat and headed back to the spot where she'd seen him earlier. The streets were quieter now, with fewer people rushing about. As she approached the corner, relief washed over her. He was still there, huddled against the cold brick wall. This time she didn't hesitate. Kneeling beside him, she said gently, "I came back to check on you." He looked up, surprised. "You did?" he asked, his voice tinged with disbelief. "Of course," she replied. "I couldn't stop thinking about what you told me earlier. I want to help." Mr. Thompson shook his head slowly. "You don't need to do that," he muttered. "I've made my peace with, well, all of this." But even as he spoke, his eyes betrayed him. There was a flicker of hope, buried deep, beneath layers of pain and resignation. Karoline wasn't about to let him brush her off. "Listen," she said firmly. "You mattered to me once. You still matter. You taught me things I carry with me every single day. Let me return the favor." For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then, hesitantly, Mr. Thompson began opening up again. He talked about the early days after losing his home, the shame, the isolation, the feeling of being invisible. People walked past him without a second glance, as if he were part of the scenery. Some avoided eye contact altogether, while others tossed coins into his cup without acknowledging him as a person. It was dehumanizing, he admitted, and it chipped away at whatever self-respect he had left. But what struck Karoline most was how hard he tried to hold on to his dignity. Despite everything, he refused to blame anyone else for his situation. "Life happens," he said simply. "Sometimes, no matter how careful you are, things fall apart." His humility only deepened Karoline's resolve. She knew she couldn't fix everything overnight, but she also knew she couldn't walk away. Not now, not after hearing his story. As they continued talking, Karoline started piecing together a plan in her mind. She had always believed in the power of storytelling, that sharing someone's truth could move hearts and inspire action. Maybe, just maybe, she could use her platform as a journalist to shine a light on Mr. Thompson's plight. If people understood the human side of homelessness, perhaps they'd be more willing to help, not just him, but others like him. Before leaving, she asked permission to write about him. At first, Mr. Thompson was hesitant. "Why would anyone care about my story?" he asked, his voice heavy with doubt. "Because your story matters," Karoline insisted, "and because it might help other people see homelessness differently. It's not just statistics or stereotypes, it's real people with real lives." Eventually, he agreed, though reluctantly. "If you think it'll make a difference," he said, "then go ahead." The next morning, Karoline arrived at work determined to make this story count. She pitched the idea to her editor, laying out her vision for a feature piece that would humanize homelessness through Mr. Thompson's experience. At first, her editor was skeptical. "It's a tough sell," he warned. "People tend to tune out when it comes to these kinds of issues." But Karoline wouldn't back down. She argued passionately, pointing out that this wasn't just another sob story. It was an opportunity to spark meaningful change. "Think about it," she urged. "What if we could show readers that homelessness isn't something that happens to other people? What if we could remind them that everyone has value, regardless of their circumstances?" Her persistence paid off. Reluctantly, her editor gave her the green light, but with one condition: The article had to strike the right balance between emotion and facts. No sensationalism, no pity parties, just honest, raw storytelling. With the approval secured, Karoline threw herself into the project. Over the next few days, she spent hours interviewing Mr. Thompson, digging deeper into his journey. She learned about the small joys he still clung to, the kindness of strangers who occasionally stopped to chat, the books he read at the library to pass the time, and the memories of his teaching days that kept him grounded. She also reached out to experts, social workers, housing advocates, and nonprofit leaders to provide context for his situation. Each conversation brought her closer to understanding the bigger picture. Homelessness wasn't just an individual problem. It was a systemic issue fueled by rising housing costs, lack of affordable health care, and insufficient support networks. And yet, despite its complexity, it was solvable. If enough people cared, enough to act. As Karoline worked tirelessly on the article, she felt a renewed sense of purpose. For years, she had chased stories that entertained or informed, but this was different. This was personal. This was about giving a voice to someone who had been silenced by society. And maybe, just maybe, inspiring others to do the same. When the final draft was ready, she read it aloud to herself, imagining how it would resonate with readers. Would they feel moved? Motivated? Or would they scroll past, indifferent? Only time would tell. But one thing was certain. She had done everything in her power to honor Mr. Thompson's story, and to remind the world that behind every statistic was a human being worthy of compassion. The day the article was published, Karoline woke up with a mix of excitement and nerves. She had poured her heart into writing it, but she couldn't predict how people would respond. Would they care? Would they even read it? As she scrolled through her phone over morning coffee, her anxiety began to ease. The article titled, "From Classroom to Cold Streets, A Teacher's Untold Story," was already gaining traction online. Comments were pouring in, shares were skyrocketing, and messages of support filled her inbox. One comment stood out among the rest. "This broke my heart. I had no idea homelessness could touch someone like this. A teacher, someone who gave so much to others. Thank you for sharing his story." That single sentence made Karoline realize she had struck a chord. People weren't just reading the article. They were connecting with it on a deeply human level. They saw Mr. Thompson not as a faceless statistic, but as a real person with dreams, struggles, and dignity. By mid-morning, the story had gone viral. It wasn't just being shared locally. It was spreading across the country. News outlets picked it up, radio shows discussed it, and social media buzzed with reactions. Some readers expressed anger, not at Mr. Thompson, but at the broken systems that allowed situations like his to happen. Others shared their own stories of hardship, creating a ripple effect of empathy and understanding. For the first time in years, Karoline felt like her work truly mattered. While the public response was overwhelming, Karoline knew the real test would be whether this wave of attention translated into tangible help for Mr. Thompson. She didn't want his story to become just another fleeting moment of outrage that faded away after a few days. Determined to turn the momentum into action, she decided to take things a step further. That evening, she set up a crowdfunding campaign, hoping to raise enough money to get him off the streets and back on his feet. She spent hours crafting the page, carefully balancing honesty with hope. She included excerpts from the article, photos of Mr. Thompson, with his permission, and a clear breakdown of how the funds would be used: housing, healthcare, food, and other essentials. Her goal was modest at first, $10,000. But within hours of launching the campaign, donations began pouring in faster than she could have imagined. Strangers from all over the country contributed, many leaving heartfelt notes alongside their contributions. "This is for the teachers who shaped us," one donor wrote. Another added, "No one should live like this. Let's show him he's not alone." By the end of the first day, the campaign had raised over $25,000, more than double her initial target. Local charities took notice too. A housing nonprofit reached out, offering temporary shelter while they worked on securing permanent housing for him. A free clinic agreed to provide medical care, addressing some of the health issues he'd neglected for years. Even grocery stores donated gift cards so he wouldn't have to worry about meals. Karoline updated Mr. Thompson regularly, making sure he knew about every development. At first, he seemed overwhelmed by the outpouring of support. "Why are people doing this for me?" he asked during one of their conversations. His voice carried a mix of gratitude and disbelief, as if he couldn't fathom why anyone would go out of their way to help him. "Because you deserve it," Karoline replied firmly. "And because your story reminded people of something important, we're all connected. Helping you isn't just about you, it's about showing that we can do better as a society." But Karoline understood that financial aid alone wouldn't solve everything. Money could provide stability, but it couldn't heal the emotional scars Mr. Thompson carried. Years of living on the streets had left him feeling invisible, unworthy, and disconnected from the world. To truly rebuild his life, he needed more than shelter and food. He needed community. With that in mind, Karoline reached out to her old high school classmates, many of whom still lived in the area. She sent out a group message explaining what had happened to Mr. Thompson and asking if anyone would be willing to reconnect with him. The response was immediate and heartfelt. Dozens of former students replied, eager to help. Some offered to visit him, while others volunteered to assist with practical tasks like filling out paperwork or accompanying him to appointments. A small group of alumni even organized a surprise reunion at the community center where Mr. Thompson had once taught. They decorated the room with photos from his teaching days, along with banners that read, "We miss you, teach." When he walked in, surrounded by familiar faces, his eyes welled up with tears. For the first time in years, he felt seen and valued. As weeks turned into months, Mr. Thompson's life began to transform in ways neither he nor Karoline had anticipated. With the help of the funds raised, he moved into a cozy one-bedroom apartment downtown. It wasn't luxurious, but it was warm, safe, and his. He started attending counseling sessions, working through the trauma of his past experiences. Slowly, but surely, he began to rebuild his sense of self-worth. Meanwhile, the connections he rekindled with his former students gave him a renewed sense of purpose. Encouraged by their enthusiasm, he started volunteering at the same community center, where the reunion had taken place. There he led creative writing workshops for underprivileged youth, sharing the same passion for storytelling that had inspired Karoline years ago. Watching him interact with the kids, laughing, encouraging, and guiding them, filled her with pride. This was the man she remembered, the mentor who had believed in her when she doubted herself. For Karoline, seeing Mr. Thompson's transformation reinforced her belief in the power of collective effort. One story, one act of kindness, one moment of connection could create ripples far beyond what she had imagined. Inspired by the success of the campaign, she began advocating for broader systemic changes. She partnered with local organizations to push for policies that addressed affordable housing shortages and expanded access to mental health resources. She also continued writing, using her platform to highlight similar stories of resilience and hope. Looking back, Karoline realized that her encounter with Mr. Thompson hadn't just changed his life, it had changed hers too. It reminded her why she became a journalist in the first place, to give a voice to those who might otherwise go unheard. And in doing so, she discovered a truth that stayed with her long after the headlines faded. Compassion, when paired with action, has the power to change the world one life at a time. As the weeks went by, Mr. Thompson began settling into his new apartment. It was small and modest, a far cry from the home he once owned. But it was a sanctuary. For the first time in years, he had a place to call his own. The walls were bare, at first, but slowly, they started filling up with little reminders of hope. A calendar hung near the kitchen, its dates marked with appointments and plans. A stack of books sat on a wooden shelf, donated by some of his former students who remembered how much he loved literature. Even the faint smell of fresh paint lingered, a subtle reminder that this space represented a clean slate. Karoline visited him often, bringing groceries or just sitting down for a cup of tea. During one of these visits, she noticed something different about him. His shoulders weren't slumped anymore. There was a newfound lightness in his step. When he spoke, his voice carried a warmth she hadn't heard before. "I never thought I'd feel safe again," he admitted, gazing around the room as if still marveling at its existence. This feels like a second chance." But Karoline knew better than to assume everything was perfect. Healing wasn't linear, and she could see glimpses of the scars he still carried. Sometimes when they talked, his hands would tremble slightly, betraying the anxiety that lingered beneath the surface. Other times he'd pause mid-sentence, lost in memories of the streets, the cold nights, the hunger, the loneliness. Yet despite those moments, he was determined to keep moving forward. One afternoon, while helping him unpack a box of donated clothes, Karoline stumbled upon an old photo album tucked away in the corner. Curious, she asked if she could look through it. He nodded, watching quietly as she flipped through the pages. The photos captured snippets of his life before everything fell apart. Pictures of him standing proudly in front of a classroom, surrounded by smiling students. Candid shots of family gatherings filled with laughter. Even a faded image of him, holding a trophy for winning a local poetry contest. "These are beautiful," Karoline said softly, holding up a picture of him shaking hands with a colleague at a school event. "Why didn't you bring these sooner?" Mr. Thompson shrugged, his expression bittersweet. "I guess I didn't think they mattered anymore," he replied. "When you lose everything, it's easy to forget what you once had. But now, looking at them makes me realize I haven't completely lost myself." That moment struck a chord with Karoline. She realized that healing wasn't just about finding shelter or financial stability. It was also about reclaiming identity. These photos weren't just mementos. They were proof of a life well lived, a testament to the person he used to be. Inspired, she suggested framing a few of them and hanging them up around the apartment. "Let's make this place feel like home," she said with a smile. Together, they spent the rest of the afternoon arranging the frames, turning the empty walls into a gallery of resilience. Meanwhile, the impact of Mr. Thompson's story continued to ripple outward. The crowdfunding campaign had raised over $50,000 by the time it closed, far exceeding anyone's expectations. With the extra funds, Karoline worked with local organizations to set up a long-term support plan for him. Part of the money went toward paying off lingering medical bills, while another portion was saved for emergencies. A financial advisor volunteered to help him manage the remaining funds responsibly, ensuring he wouldn't face future instability. Word of the campaign's success spread quickly, inspiring others to take action. A local church started a monthly meal drive for people experiencing homelessness, naming it Thompson's Table in his honor. Nearby businesses offered discounts to customers who donated winter clothing or toiletries for shelters. Even city officials took notice, citing his story during debates about affordable housing initiatives. What began as a single act of kindness had sparked a wave of compassion that reached far beyond one man's plight. Karoline watched all of this unfold, with a mix of awe and gratitude. She had always believed in the power of storytelling, but seeing it play out in real life left her humbled. People weren't just moved, they were motivated. And it wasn't just about Mr. Thompson anymore. His story had become a catalyst for change, shining a spotlight on issues that affected countless others. Despite the progress, Karoline knew there was still work to be done. Homelessness wasn't a problem that could be solved overnight, and systemic changes required sustained effort. Determined to keep the momentum going, she began collaborating with advocacy groups to push for policy reforms. She attended town hall meetings, wrote follow-up articles, and gave interviews to amplify the voices of those working tirelessly behind the scenes. Her goal was simple: to ensure that Mr. Thompson's story didn't fade into obscurity once the initial buzz died down. One of the most impactful projects she undertook was creating a documentary-style video series featuring interviews with people experiencing homelessness. Each episode highlighted a different individual, sharing their journey and emphasizing their humanity. The series aired on social media platforms and local news channels, reaching audiences across the country. Viewers responded with messages of empathy and offers of support, proving that awareness could lead to action. Through it all, Karoline stayed close to Mr. Thompson, checking in regularly to see how he was adjusting to his new life. They often discussed the broader implications of his story and how it could inspire others to rethink their perceptions of homelessness. People are starting to see us not as problems to solve, but as people to care for, he told her one evening. That's the biggest victory of all. As time passed, Mr. Thompson found joy in giving back. Teaching had always been his passion, and now he had the opportunity to share that gift again. At the community center, he led creative writing workshops for kids from low-income families, encouraging them to express themselves through words. Many of the children reminded him of his former students, young, eager, and full of potential. Seeing their faces light up when they completed a poem or short story reignited a sense of purpose he thought he'd lost forever. He also became an advocate in his own right, speaking at events and sharing his experiences with anyone willing to listen. His talks were raw and honest, unafraid to confront the harsh realities of homelessness while offering a message of hope. Life can knock you down, he often said, but it's up to you, and the people around you, to decide whether you stay there. Watching him embrace this role filled Karoline with pride. Here was a man who had once felt invisible, now standing tall and using his voice to uplift others. It was a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the transformative power of kindness. By the end of the year, both Karoline and Mr. Thompson had come a long way from the day they reunited on that cold street corner. Their lives had intertwined in ways neither of them could have predicted, proving that sometimes the smallest acts of connection could lead to extraordinary outcomes. As Karoline reflected on everything that had happened, she couldn't help but smile. This wasn't just a story of survival, it was a story of renewal, of community, and of the belief that no one should ever have to face life's challenges alone. Months turned into a year, and Mr. Thompson's life continued to evolve in ways that surprised even him. The apartment he once thought of as just a roof over his head had become more than that. It was a home filled with warmth and purpose. Every morning he woke up to sunlight streaming through the curtains, grateful for the simple joys he'd once taken for granted. A warm bed, running water, and the quiet comfort of knowing he was safe. But what truly made the space special were the connections he'd rebuilt. Friends from his past stopped by regularly, bringing laughter and stories. Former students visited often, eager to catch up and share how his lessons had shaped their lives. These visits reminded him that his impact hadn't ended when he left the classroom. It had simply been paused. Karoline stayed involved too, checking in not just as a journalist but as a friend. Their bond had grown stronger over time, built on mutual respect and shared determination to make a difference. She noticed subtle changes in him, how he stood taller now, how his eyes sparkled when he talked about his workshops at the community center. He wasn't the same defeated man she'd met on the street. Little by little, he was reclaiming pieces of himself, rediscovering the person he used to be before life knocked him down. One Saturday afternoon, Karoline arrived at his apartment with a stack of papers under her arm. "I brought something for you," she said, setting them on the coffee table. It was a collection of letters written by people who had read the article about him. Some were handwritten, others typed, but each one carried a message of gratitude or encouragement. One letter stood out, a note from a teacher who had faced similar struggles but found strength in Mr. Thompson's story. "Your journey inspired me to keep going," it read. "Thank you for reminding me that we're never truly alone." Mr. Thompson flipped through the pages slowly, his hands trembling slightly. "I can't believe all these people took the time to write," he murmured, his voice thick with emotion. "It's overwhelming." "It's proof of how much your story resonates," Karoline replied gently. "You've touched so many lives without even realizing it." For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then, softly, Mr. Thompson said, "I always thought my life was over. I thought no one cared anymore. Turns out I couldn't have been more wrong. As Mr. Thompson embraced his new chapter, Karoline continued pushing for broader change. Her advocacy work had expanded beyond writing articles. She became a vocal advocate for policy reform, speaking at conferences and collaborating with organizations focused on homelessness. She knew individual acts of kindness mattered, but lasting solutions required systemic shifts. Affordable housing, mental health resources, job training programs. These were the building blocks of a safety net strong enough to prevent others from falling through the cracks. Her efforts didn't go unnoticed. Local lawmakers invited her to testify at hearings, sharing insights from her reporting and personal experiences working alongside Mr. Thompson. When asked why she was so passionate about the issue, she responded honestly, "Because I've seen firsthand what happens when we fail people. And I've also seen what's possible when we come together to lift someone up. We can't afford to look away anymore." The ripple effects of her work began to show. City officials allocated additional funding for shelters and support services. Businesses partnered with nonprofits to create job opportunities for individuals transitioning out of homelessness. Even schools incorporated discussions about empathy and community responsibility into their curriculums, using Mr. Thompson's story as an example of resilience and redemption. But perhaps the most profound impact was felt within the community itself. People started paying closer attention to the unhoused individuals they passed on the streets, to the families struggling to make ends meet, to the neighbors quietly battling hardships behind closed doors. Conversations shifted from judgment to understanding, from apathy to action. A local bookstore launched a book drive for shelters after hearing about Mr. Thompson's love for literature. A group of high school students organized a fundraiser to buy winter coats for those in need. Even small gestures like offering a smile or striking up a conversation became acts of solidarity. Despite the progress, Karoline and Mr. Thompson both understood that challenges remained. Homelessness was a complex issue with deep roots, and no single solution could fix everything overnight. There were still nights when Mr. Thompson lay awake, haunted by memories of the streets, the biting cold, the hunger pangs, the crushing loneliness. Counseling helped, as did the unwavering support of his friends, but healing was a process that took time. Similarly, Karoline faced moments of frustration. Change was slow, and resistance was inevitable. Some critics dismissed her efforts as naive or idealistic, arguing that systemic problems couldn't be solved by goodwill alone. Others accused her of exploiting Mr. Thompson's story for personal gain, though anyone who knew her would know that wasn't true. Through it all, she leaned on her conviction that every step forward, no matter how small, mattered. Progress wasn't measured in leaps, it was measured in persistence. One evening, as autumn leaves swirled outside his window, Mr. Thompson sat down with Karoline to reflect on everything they'd accomplished together. They talked about the highs, the viral article, the successful crowdfunding campaign, the renewed sense of purpose, and the lows, the sleepless nights, the doubts, the setbacks. But mostly, they talked about hope. Hope that others would learn from their journey. Hope that communities everywhere would start seeing homelessness not as an unsolvable problem but as a call to action. "You know," Mr. Thompson said, breaking the silence, "I used to think my story was just mine, that it didn't matter to anyone else. But now I see it differently. Maybe my pain can help someone else feel less alone." Karoline nodded, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "That's exactly why your story matters," she said. "Because it reminds us that everyone has value. No matter where you are or what you've been through, you deserve to be seen, to be heard, to be cared for." In that moment, surrounded by the echoes of their shared journey, they realized something powerful. This wasn't just a story of survival or recovery. It was a story of connection, a reminder that humanity thrives when we choose to stand by one another, especially in our darkest hours. And while the road ahead might still hold obstacles, they faced it together, armed with compassion, courage, and the belief that even the smallest acts of kindness could light the way forward. By the second year since their paths crossed, Mr. Thompson had settled into a rhythm that felt almost normal again. Normal, of course, was a relative term. Life would never be the same as it was before he lost everything. But he had built something new, something meaningful. Every morning he woke up early, brewed himself a cup of strong coffee, and walked to the community center where he taught creative writing workshops. The kids who attended were a lively bunch, full of energy and curiosity, and they reminded him of why he fell in love with teaching in the first place. The workshops weren't just about grammar or storytelling techniques, they were about giving these children a voice. Many of them came from tough backgrounds, facing challenges far beyond their years. Some lived in shelters, others juggled schoolwork while helping support their families. Yet when they sat down to write, they transformed. Their pens moved across the pages with urgency, spilling out dreams, fears, and hopes they might not have shared otherwise. Watching them find strength in words made Mr. Thompson feel like he was doing what he was meant to do all along. Karoline often dropped by during these sessions, sitting quietly at the back of the room to observe. She loved seeing the way his eyes lit up when a student read aloud a piece they'd worked hard on, or how he leaned forward with genuine interest, asking thoughtful questions to guide them deeper into their thoughts. There was magic in those moments, a quiet kind of alchemy where pain turned into poetry, fear into courage, and isolation into connection. It was clear that both teacher and students were learning from each other. After one particularly inspiring session, Karoline approached him as the kids filed out, chattering excitedly about their next assignment. "You're amazing at this," she said, smiling warmly. "Do you realize how much you're shaping them?" Mr. Thompson chuckled softly, shaking his head. "I'm just guiding them," he replied modestly. "They're the ones doing the heavy lifting. These kids have so much inside them, it's my job to help them let it out." While Mr. Thompson focused on his workshops, Karoline continued advocating for systemic change. Her efforts had grown beyond local initiatives. She now collaborated with national organizations working to address homelessness and inequality. One project she spearheaded involved creating a resource guide for cities looking to implement affordable housing programs. Another initiative brought together journalists, activists, and policymakers to discuss best practices for tackling homelessness without perpetuating stigma. Her work earned recognition, and soon she was invited to speak at conferences across the country. Each time she used her platform to highlight stories like Mr. Thompson's, not because they were unique but because they represented universal truths. Homelessness wasn't an abstract issue. It was a human experience shaped by circumstances that could affect anyone. By sharing these narratives, she hoped to inspire empathy and action. But as much as she thrived in her role as an advocate, Karoline never lost sight of the person who started it all. She knew that none of this would have happened if she hadn't stopped to talk to Mr. Thompson that cold December morning. That single act of reaching out had set off a chain reaction, proving that small gestures could lead to monumental change. As spring approached, Mr. Thompson decided it was time to take another step toward healing. He wanted to visit the park where he used to walk during his teaching days. For years, he had avoided places tied to his past, fearing they would bring back painful memories. But now, surrounded by people who cared about him and a renewed sense of purpose, he felt ready to face those ghosts. On a sunny Saturday afternoon, Karoline accompanied him to the park. They strolled along the familiar paths, listening to birds chirp and children laugh. At one point, they stopped near a bench overlooking a pond. "This is where I used to sit after school sometimes," Mr. Thompson said, his voice tinged with nostalgia. "I'd grade papers here, watch the ducks swim around. It was peaceful." Karoline glanced at him, noting the mix of sadness and contentment in his expression. "Does it feel different now?" she asked gently. He thought for a moment before answering. "Yeah, it does," he admitted. "It's not just a memory anymore. It's part of who I am today. Someone who survived, someone who's still growing. I guess that's progress, isn't it?" She nodded, placing a hand on his shoulder. "That's exactly what it is." Back at the apartment later that evening, Mr. Thompson pulled out an old journal he'd kept during his teaching years. He hadn't opened it in ages, afraid of what he might find inside: regret, longing, maybe even bitterness. But tonight, he felt ready. Flipping through the pages, he found entries filled with reflections on lessons learned, triumphs celebrated, and struggles overcome. Reading them brought tears to his eyes, but they were tears of gratitude rather than sorrow. "I forgot how much I used to believe in myself," he said, showing Karoline a passage where he wrote about the importance of perseverance. "I think I needed to be reminded of that." "You didn't forget," she corrected him. "You just needed time to rediscover it." As the months passed, their friendship deepened further. They became confidants, sharing stories, ideas, and dreams for the future. Karoline confided in Mr. Thompson about her aspirations to expand her advocacy work globally, while he shared his vision of expanding the workshops to reach more communities. Together, they brainstormed ways to make those goals a reality, supporting each other every step of the way. Through it all, they remained grounded in the understanding that change didn't happen overnight, and that was okay. What mattered most was staying committed to the journey, even when the road felt uncertain. Whether it was through teaching, writing, or speaking out, they were determined to keep pushing forward, knowing that their efforts could inspire others to do the same. And so, as another season changed and leaves began to fall once more, Mr. Thompson and Karoline stood side by side, ready to face whatever lay ahead. They had come a long way since that fateful day on the street corner, but they knew their story wasn't finished yet. In fact, it was only beginning, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the transformative power of compassion. Years had passed since that cold December morning, when Karoline first saw her former teacher sitting on the sidewalk, wrapped in a tattered blanket. What began as a chance encounter had grown into something neither of them could have imagined, a story of resilience, connection, and transformation that touched countless lives. Now, as they sat together in Mr. Thompson's cozy apartment one quiet evening, they reflected on everything they had been through. The room was warm, lit by the soft glow of a table lamp. A stack of freshly graded essays from his latest workshop lay scattered across the coffee table, alongside a steaming cup of tea. Outside, the city buzzed with its usual energy, but inside, there was a sense of calm, a feeling of belonging that neither of them took for granted anymore. "You know," Mr. Thompson said, breaking the silence, "I used to think my life ended the day I lost my home, but now I see it differently. That wasn't the end. It was just another chapter." Karoline smiled, leaning back in her chair. "And what do you think this chapter is about?" He thought for a moment, his gaze drifting toward the framed photos on the wall, the ones they'd hung together months ago. "Purpose," he replied finally, "finding meaning again, helping others find theirs." It was true. Through his workshops at the community center, Mr. Thompson had become a beacon of hope for kids who often felt invisible. He taught them not just how to write, but how to believe in themselves, to channel their struggles into art, to turn pain into purpose. Many of his students stayed in touch long after leaving his class, sharing updates about their lives and thanking him for believing in them when no one else did. Some even pursued careers in writing or teaching, inspired by his example. Karoline's journey had evolved too. Her advocacy work had taken her far beyond Boston, bringing her face-to-face with policymakers, activists, and communities grappling with similar challenges. She traveled across the country, speaking at conferences and collaborating with organizations dedicated to addressing homelessness and inequality. Along the way, she collected stories not just of hardship, but of triumph, resilience, and humanity. Each story reinforced her belief that change was possible, even if it required patience, persistence, and collective effort. One of her proudest accomplishments was the launch of a national storytelling initiative aimed at humanizing homelessness. The program trained volunteers to document personal narratives and share them through podcasts, videos, and public events. It gave a platform to those whose voices were often overlooked, reminding audiences that behind every statistic was a person with dreams, fears, and untapped potential. But despite her growing influence, Karoline never forgot where it all started. Whenever she spoke publicly, she made sure to mention Mr. Thompson's story, Not because it was extraordinary, but because it was universal. Homelessness wasn't something that happened to other people. It was a reality shaped by circumstances that could affect anyone. By sharing his journey, she hoped to inspire compassion and action, proving that even the smallest acts of kindness could create ripples of change. Their bond remained central to both their lives. Over time, Karoline and Mr. Thompson had become more than journalist and subject, mentor and student. They were friends, partners in purpose, united by a shared commitment to making the world a little kinder, a little fairer. They often joked that fate must have led her to walk past him that morning, though neither truly believed in coincidence. Instead, they saw it as a reminder that we are all connected, that every interaction has the power to shape someone's life in ways we may never fully understand. On weekends, they sometimes ventured out together, exploring parts of the city they hadn't visited before. During one such outing, they stumbled upon a mural painted along the side of an old building. Its vibrant colors depicted scenes of unity, hands reaching out to help others, faces smiling despite adversity, words like hope and together woven into the design. Standing before it, Karoline turned to Mr. Thompson and said, "This reminds me of us." He nodded, tracing the outline of the mural with his eyes. "Yeah," he agreed. "It's messy, imperfect, but beautiful, just like life." As the years went on, their efforts continued to bear fruit. Affordable housing projects sprang up in neighborhoods once plagued by neglect. Support networks expanded, offering resources for mental health, job training, and addiction recovery. Schools incorporated lessons on empathy and community responsibility, encouraging young people to think critically about the world around them. None of these changes happened overnight, but each step forward brought them closer to a future where no one had to face life's challenges alone. One particularly proud moment came when a local lawmaker credited their advocacy work during a speech announcing new legislation aimed at preventing homelessness. "Change doesn't start with policies," the official said. "It starts with people. People like Karoline and Mr. Thompson who remind us of our shared humanity and inspire us to do better." When Karoline heard the news, she called Mr. Thompson immediately. "Did you hear?" she asked, her voice brimming with excitement. "They mentioned us." He laughed, the sound rich and full of joy. "We should frame that quote," he teased. "Hang it right next to the photo of me shaking hands with my students." Looking back on their journey, both Karoline and Mr. Thompson marveled at how much had changed, not just in their own lives but in the lives of others. They knew the fight wasn't over. Homelessness was still a pressing issue and systemic inequities persisted, but they also knew that progress was possible when people came together with compassion and determination. For Karoline, meeting Mr. Thompson had reaffirmed why she became a journalist, to give a voice to those who might otherwise go unheard. For Mr. Thompson, reconnecting with his passion for teaching had reminded him that his life still held immense value, even after he thought he'd lost everything. Together, they proved that healing wasn't linear, that redemption wasn't reserved for heroes, and that everyone deserved a second chance. As they raised their teacups in a quiet toast that evening, neither needed words to express what they were thinking. Their story was far from perfect, but it was real, and in its imperfections lay its beauty. They had faced darkness and emerged stronger, not because they were extraordinary, but because they chose to care, to act, to believe in the possibility of change. And so, as the night stretched on and the city lights twinkled outside, they sat together, grateful for the journey they had shared, and hopeful for the chapters yet to come. After all, the world was full of stories waiting to be told, and they intended to keep telling them one word at a time. Years had passed since that cold December morning when Karoline first saw her former teacher sitting on the sidewalk, wrapped in a tattered blanket. What began as a chance encounter had grown into something neither of them could have imagined, a story of resilience, connection, and transformation that touched countless lives. Now, as they sat together in Mr. Thompson's cozy apartment one quiet evening, they reflected on everything they had been through. The room was warm, lit by the soft glow of a table lamp. A stack of freshly graded essays from his latest workshop lay scattered across the coffee table, alongside a steaming cup of tea. Outside, the city buzzed with its usual energy, but inside, there was a sense of calm, a feeling of belonging that neither of them took for granted anymore. "You know," Mr. Thompson said, breaking the silence, "I used to think my life ended the day I lost my home, but now I see it differently. That wasn't the end. It was just another chapter." Karoline smiled, leaning back in her chair. "And what do you think this chapter is about?" He thought for a moment, his gaze drifting toward the framed photos on the wall, the ones they'd hung together months ago. "Purpose," he replied finally, "finding meaning again, helping others find theirs." It was true. Through his workshops at the community center, Mr. Thompson had become a beacon of hope for kids who often felt invisible. He taught them not just how to write, but how to believe in themselves, to channel their struggles into art, to turn pain into purpose. Many of his students stayed in touch long after leaving his class, sharing updates about their lives and thanking him for believing in them when no one else did. Some even pursued careers in writing or teaching, inspired by his example. Karoline's journey had evolved too. Her advocacy work had taken her far beyond Boston, bringing her face-to-face with policymakers, activists, and communities grappling with similar challenges. She traveled across the country, speaking at conferences and collaborating with organizations dedicated to addressing homelessness and inequality. Along the way, she collected stories not just of hardship, but of triumph, resilience, and humanity. Each story reinforced her belief that change was possible, even if it required patience, persistence, and collective effort. One of her proudest accomplishments was the launch of a national storytelling initiative aimed at humanizing homelessness. The program trained volunteers to document personal narratives and share them through podcasts, videos, and public events. It gave a platform to those whose voices were often overlooked, reminding audiences that behind every statistic was a person, with dreams, fears, and untapped potential. But despite her growing influence, Karoline never forgot where it all started. Whenever she spoke publicly, she made sure to mention Mr. Thompson's story, not because